Hi, my name's Corinne. Last week, I flew home after closing the biggest deal of my life, $47 billion. I walked through my own front door and found my family throwing a party in my house. They'd moved in, quietly, without a word to me. My mother told me the couch was mine now. My sister said this place was family property. But the worst part wasn't losing my bedroom. It was realizing they had planned it, for months, behind my back. And when I finally said no, they tried to have me declared unstable. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like, but nothing prepares you for it when it wears your mother's face. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? Because what you're about to hear started the night I came home and realized I no longer belonged in my own life. We're gone. By the time the wheels touched the runway at DFW, my body felt hollowed out in that familiar way only exhaustion can carve you. The kind that settles deep in your bones after weeks of pressure, negotiations, and pretending your heartbeat isn't racing while billions of dollars sit on the line. The deal was done. $47 billion finalized. Signatures dry, hands shaken, smiles exchanged. In the quiet after the cabin lights dimmed, I leaned my head against the window and watched the blur of Texas lights slide past. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The clean weight of winning. Not the applause kind. The silent kind you carry alone. I was 45 years old, the youngest daughter in a family that still spoke to me like I was the girl who trailed behind everyone else at church. I built my life with numbers, contracts, steel nerves, and long nights. Not once had my parents asked what it took to get here. Not once had my sister looked at me as anything more than the wallet that never closed. The drive north into Plano blurred by in streaks of headlights and brake lights. Evening traffic wrapped the highway in a steady hum. I kept the radio low, letting the voice of the city carry me home. Lawns trimmed too perfectly, porch lights warm and spaced at polite distances. The quiet order of a Texas suburb that pretended nothing ever went wrong. My neighborhood appeared around the final turn. That's when I saw the cars, 3 of them, parked along my curb. One I recognized as my parents'. The others belonged to my sister's family. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. No one had called. No one ever called unless they needed something. I pulled into my driveway slowly, studying the dark rectangle of my front door. Then I saw the note, a yellow square taped at eye level. The porch light caught the slanted handwriting. "Welcome home, I guess?" My sister's handwriting. Rhonda always said Marla never learned to write neatly because she rushed through everything. I stood there longer than I should have. The words looked friendly at first glance, but something underneath them felt crooked, like a smile that comes too late. Inside, the house wasn't quiet. Music thumped through walls that normally held only the soft click of my security system. Laughter burst out in waves. Children's voices crashed into each other in shrill excitement. The scent of fried food hung heavy in the air. I stepped inside and felt the shift immediately. Furniture dragged inches out of place, shoes piled near the doorway, toys scattered across my living room rug like a careless footprint. They were all there. My parents stood near the kitchen island with glasses in their hands. Marla leaned against my sofa, her husband beside her, one arm draped around her shoulders. Their kids darted between chairs, half dancing to the music. No one stopped. It was as if I had walked into someone else's party. "Why are you all here?" My voice sounded calm, even to me. My mother turned first. Rhonda's smile flickered, then settled into something artificial. "Oh, you're home already." My father shifted his weight. "We thought you wouldn't be back until tomorrow." Marla didn't miss a beat. "We made it a little celebration. You know how stressful traveling is." I looked around again, at the rearranged furniture, at the bags near the hallway, at a stack of folded blankets laid out on a chair that wasn't usually there. "And who said you could use my house like this?" That's when the air changed. Rhonda lifted her glass and waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be dramatic, Corinne. This place is family property now." My father nodded as if confirming a weather report. "You barely live here anyway. You work all the time. It makes sense to share." Marla stepped forward. "We moved some things in earlier. It's easier this way. The kids need space. And honestly, you've got more money than you could ever spend." She gestured toward the living room. "You can take the couch for now until we figure out the permanent setup." For a moment, nothing inside me moved. Not anger, not shock. Just a cold, quiet awareness spreading through my chest like frost. I walked slowly through my own home. My framed photos had been shifted to the side. My office door stood open. Boxes of my nephew's clothes sat in the corners. My space had been handled like leftover furniture. They had already decided. I felt the shape of something wrong forming beneath the surface. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It had weight, planning, assumption. When I reached the door again, I glanced at the sticky notes still clinging to the wood. That message hadn't been kind at all. It had been a warning. And as I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, something inside me shifted. I let go of the doorknob and stepped back into the house, but this time something was different in me. I wasn't walking in as the daughter who wanted to be liked or the sister who hoped for peace. I was walking in like someone who'd just discovered a ticking sound beneath the floorboards and decided to find the source before it blew. Their laughter continued, like I hadn't just caught them squatting in my home. My mother's voice rang out from the kitchen. "Corinne, come get a plate. There's still some casserole left." The smell hit me. Burnt cheese and something vaguely expired. It wasn't mine. I hadn't cooked in weeks. I didn't respond. I moved past the threshold, slowly taking it all in. My foyer was no longer my own. There were shoes, muddy ones, lined up against the wall where I used to keep my gym bag. One of the kids had left a half-eaten sandwich on the entryway table, the one I bought last spring from a reclaimed wood dealer in Austin. I stepped into the living room and found Dad lounging in my favorite reading chair, the one I usually curled into when the day had worn me thin. He held a beer in one hand and raised it toward me like we were just catching up. "There she is. Look who finally made it home," he said, chuckling. "Big shot coming back from saving the economy." I didn't smile. Marla waltzed in from the hallway, wearing one of my sweatshirts, the navy blue one I usually packed for long flights. She barely looked at me before throwing herself onto the couch, flipping the remote like she owned it. "You want a drink?" Dad asked, lifting a red Solo cup from the coffee table. "We're celebrating. Family reunion and all that." I shook my head. "I'm good." Rhonda turned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on one of my dish towels. "It must feel good, huh?" she said, "having real family in this big, cold house." I stood there, absorbing the words like rain through fabric. Not a single person had asked me how the trip went. Not a soul mentioned the deal I just closed, the money I just brought into the company, the fact that I had flown halfway across the world while they were busy claiming ownership of my life. Instead, they reduced me to a woman with too much space and not enough heart. The TV played muted football highlights. I barely noticed. I was focused on the background noise that was becoming a pattern. Every word, every look, every object out of place. I needed air, but instead, I turned toward the hallway, toward my office. The moment I stepped in, I knew something was wrong. My desk drawers had been opened. Papers were out of order. The power strip I usually tucked neatly beneath the filing cabinet was halfway pulled out. My laptop charger dangled from the edge of the desk. The floor was littered with toys, plastic figurines, a juice-stained pillow, one sock. I took a slow breath, leaned down, and carefully moved a pile of Legos off a printout from a recent audit. From behind me, Marla laughed. Oops, the kids were exploring. You know how curious they are. I turned halfway toward her. Who went through my desk? She shrugged. No one, maybe the boys. You know how kids are. Dad chimed in from behind me. This room's always felt too cold. Might be better off as a shared space. Could make a great study area for the grandkids. I didn't answer. I just looked back at my desk. The drawer that used to hold private contracts, legal forms, things that required clearance, had been tampered with, slightly ajar. A post-it note stuck to the inside read, "Needs snacks, love, Lily." I stepped out of the room without another word. The front door stood open now, letting in the chill of late autumn air. I walked to the window and looked out. The cars were still there. My driveway, the one I paid for, was blocked. My home, the one I signed for a loan, was overrun. And yet here they were, treating it like I was the visitor. And I realized then they never saw this as mine. Not just the house, not the job, not the title, not even my silence. They saw everything I built as theirs to claim, as if I had been holding it in trust for them all these years. A memory surfaced. I didn't ask for it. 15 years old, sitting at the family table. Marla had just announced she wanted to join the family real estate business. Rhonda clapped her hands like she'd just been handed a miracle. She's carrying the family name forward, Mom had said. That's what we've always hoped for. Then she turned to me. You just stay useful. Don't cause problems. You're the practical one. No celebration, no congratulations. Just a box I was assigned to and expected to stay in. And I had, for too long. Back in the present, I watched Marla laugh at something on TV. Her kids shrieked in the hallway. Dad wandered into the kitchen. No one noticed I'd gone quiet again, but this wasn't the silence they were used to. This time, I wasn't swallowing my anger. I was taking inventory. I mentally traced what had been moved, touched, disrespected. The sweatshirt, the dish towel, the charger, the desk drawer. I took it all in and said nothing. I had learned long ago that loudness didn't serve me. But precision? Precision was a language they didn't speak, and I spoke it fluently. And when I turned back toward the living room, I caught a look on my sister's face that told me everything was about to get worse. Her look didn't carry shame or guilt. It was something colder, a kind of silent declaration, that smirk in her eyes. It wasn't smug, it was settled, like she had already moved the chess pieces and was just waiting for me to catch up. I walked back into the living room without saying a word. The air felt different now, denser, the kind of stillness that wraps around your throat and dares you to speak. They were all seated, feet up, drinks in hand, my own family, in my house, arranged like royalty holding court. No one even looked up when I entered, except for my mother, who gestured vaguely toward the armrest of the love seat. "There's no room over here," she said casually, "but you can perch there if you want." Perch, not sit. It was subtle. It always was. These people never threw knives. They handed them to you, handle first, and waited for you to turn them on yourself. I didn't move. I stayed standing. The room was warm, not just from bodies, but from that lingering Texan humidity that creeps in through the cracks no matter how high the AC hums. The floor lamp in the corner buzzed faintly, casting a yellow hue that made everything look more tired than it really was. That light always bothered me. It was too dim to work under, but too bright to rest with. Much like my family. Marla was curled up under one of my throw blankets, sipping wine like she was on vacation. Dad had the remote again, flipping channels like he owned stock in the TV. Mom was humming softly as she arranged my coasters, the ones I brought back from Portugal, into a perfect stack. Then, without preamble, Dad spoke. Well, I guess now's a good time to let the cat out of the bag, he said, like we were sharing a joke. We've decided something. Mom chimed in with that syrupy voice she always used when saying something awful under the guise of love. We're going to live together now, honey. All of us, under one roof. Isn't that wonderful? I didn't answer. Marla jumped in, grinning like a kid who just opened Christmas early. It just makes sense. You've got this huge house and no one to share it with. We talked about it for weeks, and honestly, we were worried you'd overreact, so we figured it was better to just do it. Dad nodded. It's time to rebuild family unity. You know how expensive everything is nowadays? This arrangement helps everyone. I kept my arms crossed, my back straight. If I'd sat down, I would have sunk. They weren't discussing it. They had done it. No invitation, no heads up, just action. The boys already picked their rooms, Marla said, laughing. Sorry if we cleared out too much. We weren't sure what was important. You can always dig through the donate box later. I blinked. Hard. That was my life she was talking about. The rooms I curated over the years, the pieces I selected, not just for function, but for the silence they gave me at the end of loud days. And they had gutted them like an estate sale. I didn't speak. I turned and walked down the hall. I passed the hallway mirror, the one where I used to check my lipstick before a meeting, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because I looked different, but because I felt like a guest in my own skin. When I opened the guest room door, my stomach turned. Boxes were split open, their contents spilled across the bed and floor. Photos from my time in London, my first major conference in Tokyo, tossed aside like they meant nothing. My graduation frame had a crack across the corner. My award from the advisory board was face down beneath a wrinkled t-shirt I didn't own. And one thing was missing, the envelope. I kept it in the top drawer of the nightstand. A sealed manila envelope, labeled with the code name of the deal I'd just closed. It had my personal draft notes, handwritten reflections, things I hadn't yet encrypted or digitized. Gone. In the corner of the room, her youngest, Timmy, was sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. On crisp, white paper. I bent down. The edge of the page curled up just enough for me to see part of my handwriting underneath the blue marker. I didn't take it from him. I stood up, turned around, and walked out. Back in the living room, the TV volume had gone up. No one noticed I had left. Or maybe they had and just didn't care. They expected something from me, a scream, a plea, a fight. But I gave them nothing. I stood just outside the soft circle of lamplight and looked at them. Mom sipping tea like we were hosting book club. Dad tapping his knee like he was counting seconds. Marla checking her phone. I took one breath, then another. Then I asked in a voice so calm it startled even me, "When did you decide all of this?" Silence. No one looked at me, not even Marla. The air changed again, just slightly, like the house itself was waiting. And then my father finally spoke. And what he said made my stomach drop. My father finally lifted his eyes to me. His voice was steady, almost tired, like he was explaining a choice that had already run its course. "We made the decision months ago, Corinne. We just didn't think you needed to know." For a moment, nothing inside me reacted. No heat, no sting. Just a quiet, hollow pause. Then something cracked, slow and clean, like a fracture line running through glass. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't impulse. This was planning. Conversations I was never invited to. Agreements made with my name as a footnote. They had mapped my life without leaving room for my voice. My mother leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "We were worried about you," she said gently. "You've become so independent. Too independent. It's not good for a woman your age to be so detached from her family." Marla nodded quickly. "Your success put space between us. We can't even talk to you anymore without feeling like we're talking to a stranger. This way, we stay united. United. The word landed heavy. I saw it clearly then. They weren't talking about love. They were talking about control, wrapped in warm language, guilt made to look like concern, obligation presented as generosity. I looked at my father. You said family money helped me get here. What exactly does that mean? He shifted in his seat. My mother's lips pressed tight. Marla looked away. You know, he said, support, sacrifice, the things parents do. I paid for this house myself, I said quietly. Every dollar. No one argued that, because they couldn't. That's when Marla stood up. She walked closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound reasonable. If you make this difficult, she said, Mom and Dad will cut you out completely. We're trying to help you stay connected. Don't force us to choose. There it was. Not love, leverage. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I met her eyes and said only, I hear you. The room shifted again. My calm unsettled them more than anger ever would have. I moved away from the circle of their bodies and stood near the window. Outside, the unfamiliar cars lined the street like markers, evidence of how far they had already planted themselves into my world. In my head, things rearranged quietly. They had planned this for months. They believed they had leverage. They expected me to fold. That was when the truth settled in. They weren't just living in my home. They were preparing to erase me from it. The moment I recognized what they were doing, something shifted in my chest. Not panic, not rage, but a kind of cold clarity. They weren't just using my space, they were rewriting it, redefining it, and somehow erasing me in the process. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed in my room, lights off, curled under the sheets like the quiet would protect me. It didn't. I kept replaying their words, the smug silence, that patronizing calm, the way Marla didn't flinch when she said they'd cut me off. By the time a weak blue dawn started sneaking through the curtains, I was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed, bare feet on hardwood that didn't feel like mine anymore. The house was quiet, too quiet in places and too alive in others. Voices drifted from the kitchen, whispering, a soft laugh. My mother's tone, light and matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing grocery lists or the weather, not the life she'd quietly dismantled room by room. I opened my bedroom door. The hallway smelled different. Maybe it was just me, but something was off. Like the air had been moved around too much. Like someone had rearranged even the stillness. Light spilled in from the staircase. I followed it down, careful not to make noise. That's when I saw the box. It sat beside the stairs like it had always belonged there. A banker's box with a handwritten label on top, to storage. Inside, I saw parts of me. My diploma from Northwestern, still in its cherrywood frame. A photo of me in Tokyo, closing the first merger I ever led. My name on the contract, printed clean in black ink. The first moment I felt I had made it, on my own terms. Now it was shoved in a box like junk mail. Before I could touch it, my mother's voice floated from the kitchen. Oh, that's just some of Corinne's old things. We're freeing up some space. She doesn't need that stuff cluttering the place anymore. She didn't say it with cruelty. That would have been easier to fight. No, it was said with the kind of dismissiveness that strips meaning from the edges. The kind that makes you question whether the things you built ever mattered to anyone but you. I stood there a long time. I didn't speak, didn't move. I just stared at that box like it had teeth. Eventually, I went back upstairs. I closed the door, locked it this time, and then I broke. Not with sobs, not with screaming, just silence and shallow breathing. That kind of pain where the weight settles in your chest and pushes hard, like something inside is folding. I sat on the edge of the bed again, eyes wide open, but I wasn't seeing the room. I was seeing the version of myself I thought I had secured, the woman who had built something from scratch, made peace with the past, and earned her space. And now, that version was being boxed up. There was a moment, fleeting but real, when I wondered if I should just let them have it, let them stay, let the noise and invasion continue, pretend it didn't matter. That terrified me more than anything they'd done. Later that morning, still barefoot, I passed by the dining room. Marla was on the phone, her voice low but not exactly private. "She won't fight it," she said. "She never does. Once we file the papers, it's a done deal." I stopped mid-step. Papers. Not a conversation, not a request. Papers. That could mean anything. Tenancy claims, shared ownership filings, power of attorney games, or worse. I backed away slowly, her words clinging to the walls. That was the moment something in me stopped folding. I didn't feel strong yet, but I wasn't paralyzed anymore either. I started paying attention, not reacting, observing, watching how they moved through the house, which doors they checked, what they whispered, who were they calling, what documents had they seen, where were my missing files, what matched with the envelope I hadn't found since Friday night. This wasn't about family. It hadn't been for a long time. It was a plan. And then, from across the house, I heard my mother's voice again. Soft but sharp enough to carry. "If she pushes back, we move to the next phase." I stopped breathing. They were ready to go further than I ever imagined. "If she resists, we'll force it. She owes us that much." I was standing just past the edge of the kitchen doorway, hidden by the curve of the hall wall. But I felt that sentence like it was aimed right between my shoulder blades. Not whispered, not hesitant. Just dropped flat like a check that someone expected me to sign. And that was it. That was the last thread of doubt gone. They weren't confused or desperate. They weren't overwhelmed guests. They were colonizers. Of my house. Of my life. I backed away, keeping quiet, moved toward the stairs. I needed a breath, a space of my own, something steady to hold on to. The hallway felt longer than usual, like a tunnel in a bad dream. But I made it up, hand grazing the banister, heart kicking faster than it should have. When I reached my room, I saw the door was open, wide. I knew I had shut it. And then I saw Rowan. She stood in front of my open closet, holding one of my silk blouses up to her daughter's shoulders, as if they were at some upscale boutique. The girl giggled and twirled. My blouse nearly slipped from her fingers. Rowan glanced over her shoulder when she saw me. "Oh, hey," she said, like I was the one intruding. "We're reorganizing. Your room has the best layout for the kids. We figured it's just logical." Logical. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The bed was stripped, the sheets folded like hotel laundry. My toiletries were gone from the bathroom counter. A half-packed suitcase sat on the floor, my belongings clumsily folded inside. Not stolen, just relocated. Like I had no right to them anymore. "You're moving my things?" My voice cracked, low, almost too calm. Rowan didn't even flinch. "You weren't using most of it. Besides, we're trying to make this house functional for a real family." That phrase hit harder than anything else she'd said, not because it was cruel, but because she believed it. A real family, meaning not me. Before I could speak again, Marla appeared in the doorway behind her. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, like a teacher scolding a stubborn student. "You should be grateful," she said. "We're giving your life some meaning. You've always been alone, Corinne. It's time you stopped pretending that was enough." The air went thin, like the oxygen in the room had been quietly taken. I looked at them both, two women I once thought I could love safely, even at a distance. And all I saw were strangers rewriting my life to fit their comfort. Then Marla reached into her tote bag and handed me a piece of paper. It was printed with color-coded highlights and bullet points. Across the top, household assignments. Temporary structure. There were chores divided by name. Rowan's daughter had trash duty. My name under 3 sections: laundry, errands, meal prep, and under sleeping arrangement. Corinne, living room, couch. Marla spoke like she was managing a summer camp. This is for now. Until we settle the legal stuff, then we can talk more permanent arrangements. I stared at the paper. I actually felt the corners dig into my palm. My name on my own couch, like a guest in a house I paid for, like a servant to the people I once fed. I looked up and the hallway was moving. Rowan's kids were racing back and forth, shrieking, chasing each other, stepping around me like I was part of the furniture. Not one of them said, "Excuse me?" Not one of them even looked. My knees buckled slightly, just enough that I had to put a hand on the wall. I didn't cry. I walked out. The sunlight hit me hard when I stepped outside. That Texas late morning burn, unforgiving, full of glare. But the sharpness of it cut through the fog that had wrapped around me all morning. And what I saw clearly, standing barefoot in my own driveway, was this. If I let them stay one more day, I'd be erased. Not just displaced, not just dismissed. Gone. I turned around, went back inside. Marla was in the hallway, folding the assignment paper like she expected me to sign it and hang it on the fridge. I looked straight at her and said, clear and calm, "No one touches my room again." Rowan let out a soft, dry laugh. "That's not your call anymore." Marla shook her head, pitying me. "You don't make the rules here now." They expected me to yell, to scream, to crack. I didn't. I walked past them, down the stairs, across the entryway. I turned the lock on the front door, not fast, just firm. A simple click. Then I headed to the garage. No announcement, no warning, just action. And as I opened the side door and stepped into the shadows of that concrete space, I picked up my phone and with shaking hands, I dialed the one number my family never expected me to call. The garage door hummed softly as it finished closing behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to steady the phone against my thigh just to keep from dropping it. I took one slow breath, then said into the receiver, "I need help, and I need it today." There was no rush on the other end, no panic. Just a calm pause, then a voice I trusted more than anyone in a suit. "Stay where you are, I'm sending someone." I leaned against the cold concrete wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My chest hurt, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what I had just accepted, that my family had crossed a line they could never walk back from. Less than 30 minutes later, the low growl of an engine rolled up the driveway. Through the narrow garage window, I saw a black SUV stop right in front of my house. The driver's door opened, and Declan Reese stepped out like he was arriving at a board meeting, not a domestic war zone. When I opened the door to him, he didn't hug me. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Corinne, show me everything." That steadiness alone nearly broke me. We walked back into the house together. The energy shifted the second he crossed the threshold. My family felt it too. Conversations stalled. The television volume dropped. Eyes followed him as he moved with quiet purpose. He photographed my stripped bedroom, the folded bedding, the suitcase on the floor. He took a picture of the paper Marla had printed with my name, assigned to chores, and a couch like I was a visitor in a shelter. He documented the furniture they had moved, the bags by the stairs, the clutter that didn't belong to me filling every corner of my home. Rowan finally snapped, "What is he doing here?" Declan didn't look at her. "Protecting the legal owner of this property." That was the first flicker of real uncertainty I saw pass across their faces. He stepped outside to make a call. The house fell into a heavy silence. I walked toward the den without thinking, drawn by the sound of hushed voices. Rowan's voice came first. If we call Adult Protective Services and say she's unstable, they'll force her into evaluation. Then we stay. It's simple. Marla answered without hesitation. She's always been fragile. People will believe us. We just have to act fast. My hand flew to my mouth. The room tilted. My ears rang so loudly I barely heard my own breathing. They weren't just taking my home. They were willing to take my name, my mind, my credibility, everything I had built. I backed away silently and made it to the kitchen before my legs nearly gave out. I thought of every bill I had quietly paid for them, every emergency I had answered without complaint, every time I had chosen peace over confrontation. And this was what they planned to repay it with. Declan returned a moment later. He looked at my face and didn't ask questions out loud. He simply said, quietly, "Did you ever have security installed here?" I nodded. Years ago. After a stalking incident that no one in my family had taken seriously. He held out my phone. "Open your app." I hadn't looked at it in ages. I entered the code with hands that still wouldn't steady. The screen lit up with a grid of camera feeds, each time-stamped and quietly recording. We watched in silence, footage of them entering without permission, audio of Rowan announcing they were taking my bedroom, video of Marla assigning me to the couch, then the den audio, their plan to lie about my mental state. When the clip ended, I felt my knees weaken again, but this time I didn't slide down. I stood taller than I had in days. Declan called them into the living room. His voice was even, dangerous in its calm. "I have documented proof of unlawful entry, coercion, and attempted fraud. You will leave this property today. If you refuse, law enforcement will be contacted immediately." Rowan laughed, but her laugh shook. "You can't prove anything." He tilted my phone so they could see the screen. The audio played. Rowan went pale first. Marla's hand grabbed the back of a chair. My father stared at the floor like it might swallow him whole. No one spoke. Rowan's legs gave out before any of them said a word. She dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she whispered, "Please don't ruin us, Corinne. We didn't think you'd fight back." For a second after Rowan collapsed, no one moved. The room felt suspended, like the air itself was waiting for me to decide what kind of person I was going to be in that moment. I looked at her shaking on the floor and finally understood that mercy was one luxury I could no longer afford. Marla stood behind her, pale and rigid. For the first time in my life, the balance had completely turned. They weren't in control anymore, and they knew it. Marla's hand darted to her pocket. She pulled out her phone and started dialing before I could even speak. Her voice went sharp and loud, the way people sound when they are putting on a show for strangers. "She's threatening us," she said into the phone. "My daughter is unstable and—" Declan moved faster than I thought possible. He calmly placed his hand over the screen and ended the call with one tap. The quiet that followed was brutal. I stared at my mother. "You were really going to do it," I said. "You were going to lie about my mental health just to take my house." She didn't apologize. She didn't even deny it. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she whispered, "You owe us. You always have." Something inside me went cold, not numb, clear. Declan stepped beside me. "Here's what happens now," he said evenly to the room. "You will gather your belongings. You will leave this property within 40 minutes. If you refuse, all collected evidence will be forwarded to law enforcement and child services immediately." Rowan started sobbing. Her husband stayed stuck in place, staring at the wall like none of this was real. Marla's face tightened into something bitter and old. I felt nothing for their tears. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a steady resolve. Rowan suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. "You don't understand," she cried. "We need this house. The kids need space. You have money. You have everything. Why couldn't you let us have this one thing? I pulled my arm free without force. This isn't one thing, I said quietly. This is my life, and you tried to take all of it. As they started gathering bags in tense silence, Declan's phone buzzed. He stepped aside, listened, then returned with a calm look I won't ever forget. "It's approved," he said to me. "The expedited protective order went through." Marla froze. "What order?" I met her eyes. "You're legally barred from coming within 300 feet of me or this property." Rowan looked like she might faint. Marla sank into a chair. "You would do that to your own mother," she whispered. "You did this to yourself," I said. The police arrived not long after. No shouting, no drama, just procedure. They stood watch as my family packed what they had brought in. Rowan left first, eyes down, crying quietly. Her husband followed with the kids, who kept asking where they were going. Marla was last. She paused at the doorway and turned back once. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "No," I answered. "I regret not seeing you sooner." When the door finally closed, the house went still. I walked through the quiet rooms, my bedroom in disarray, the kitchen cluttered with their things, my living room looking like a place that had survived a storm. I didn't cry, I just breathed out, long and slow. I thought it was over until the phone on the counter lit up with a name I never expected to see again. The screen faded to black before the name fully registered in my mind. My thumb hovered above the phone for a moment longer than necessary. After everything that had happened, every family call felt like another door that might open into chaos again. It was my aunt, the one person in the family who never asked me for money, favors, or explanations. I finally answered. "Hello." Her voice came through soft but steady. "I heard what happened today. I just needed you to know. Not everyone is against you." Something in my chest loosened in a way I didn't realize had been tight. She told me she had warned Marla months ago that trying to control my life would only destroy what little family connection remained. No one listened to her then. But now, people were talking. And for once, they weren't blaming me. "For the first time," she said quietly, "they're starting to see what you've been carrying all these years." We spoke for a few more minutes. Nothing dramatic, just truth. And that was enough. Before we hung up, she said something that stopped me cold. "I still keep the little ceramic cardinal you gave me years ago," she said. "You told me it meant resilience. I think you need to remember that now." After the call ended, I stood at the dining table without moving. That cardinal. I remembered it clearly. I had given it away years ago after buying a second one for myself. I suddenly remembered seeing mine knocked onto the floor during the chaos of those first days. I walked slowly to my bedroom. The room was still disordered, the bed half-made, drawers uneven. The kind of mess that doesn't just look physical, it looks emotional. I smoothed the sheets back into place, folded the blanket, closed the door carefully behind me. Then I scanned my dresser until I saw it. The small ceramic cardinal, standing upright again. I picked it up and set it deliberately in the center of the dresser where it used to always sit. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. Declan called later in the evening. The protective order was locked in. The false report attempt was documented. There was already a case file created in case my family tried anything else. "You did the hardest part yourself," he told me. "You didn't fold." After we ended the call, my aunt sent a message. Short updates. Rowan and her husband were struggling to figure out housing. Marla was furious and telling anyone who would listen that I had betrayed them. But fewer people were listening now. For the first time in a long while, I felt no urge to explain myself. Their consequences were no longer my responsibility. I stepped outside into the warm Texas evening. The street was quiet, porch lights glowed softly. The air felt open in my lungs in a way it hadn't in weeks. Years ago, I had written a line in one of my journals during a hard season of my life. I found myself thinking about it now without even trying. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. But do not let it define who you become. For the first time, I truly understood what I had written. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my dining table with both hands wrapped around the warm mug. Not victorious, not broken, just myself. "This house is mine," I said quietly into the stillness. "My life is mine, and I'm done apologizing for it." Sometimes, the family you lose is the peace you gain.